So welcome again. Today we're going to have two guest speakers. It looks like Chris might be taking over for the MIT Flying Club, but you're going to hear about the MIT Flying Club and what that's all about and how to participate. And you're also going to hear from Ted about Tech Flight Corp, and there's actually an aircraft available at Beverly. It's another airport in the New England area. We'll have both of these guest speakers later today after we review yesterday's assignment and some of the key concepts. So again, with our asynchronous learning plan, yesterday was all about the flight environment, the charts and airspace, the navigation, communication, and so we'll dive into that. And today is going to be all about weather, as well as seaplanes and drones. So just a quick review, I'll go through this quickly. You saw these in the lectures. There are a lot of different types of electronic charts. We actually had some discussion in the Discord about SkyVector and how to read that. You can also, you can get physical maps or charts as they're called. You can find it electronically. The quote unquote sectional chart is a very important map that you'll be using as a pilot. And it shows, this just is an excerpt showing some of the airports. So some of the bigger airports like Boston Logan, you see there in the blue outline. And some of the smaller airports like you see at Minuteman Airport are depicted a little differently. And then we put Bedford there, which is one that a lot of folks near MIT fly out of.
Okay, oh, Cape Cod I wrote, that's not good. So we got a range of answers for this one. I celebrate folks' creativity. However, I don't know where the 5460 came from. That is a little bit higher than you probably need to fly to get above a sandbar. Actually, here's a question for the class. Put it into the chat. How many years ago was it that the glacier retreated off of Massachusetts? So how ancient is it that? How ancient is the ancient glacial history without looking at Google? Anyway, so if you're a pilot, Tina, can you highlight the 07 up at the top? It's really not supposed to be this hard. You're flying an aircraft and you're trying to decide what altitude to fly. And the FAA is trying to make your life as easy as possible. So you can just refer to these sector altitudes and fly those. 10 years after Philip was born, ouch, that's cruel. Yeah, it is only about 12,000 years, I think, since the glacier was, or 14,000 years maybe, since the glacier was on top of Cape Cod. It's relatively recent. So anyway, and that's, Cape Cod is sand and rocks left over that have been pushed by the glacier down from New Hampshire and then pulled back. What else can we see from this chart that's interesting?
So I'll highlight one thing. So whenever, so you should have learned this, but just to clarify, so if you look at a given obstacle, so here's an obstacle that it's showing. I don't know if you can see that color. There are two numbers that are indicated. So you can see 423. So that is the MSL. So that's the altitude that's going to show on your altimeter in terms of what is the height of that obstacle. And then 363 is the AGL altitude, which is above ground level. So a little bit of a morbid way to think about it is if you were flying and you hit the top of that obstacle, your altimeter would say 423, and then you would fall 363 feet till you hit the ground.
Next, please. Tina, can you make me co-host too? And I can mute the folks who've forgotten to mute.
Yes, I'm just trying to stop annotating.
Okay. All right, so there was some debate about which radio tower there was, which was the radio tower. And for the purposes of this test, I said, if you pick some other tower and you like that other tower, you can keep that other tower. But actually for radio transmission, generally towers are pretty high. I think some of these other towers here are, either one of them says stack, so it's at the top of a, maybe the top of a power plant. Some of the others might be cell phone towers, and they're not really very high. So there's one tower in here that's 1,350 feet above the ground. And I think that's an authentic radio transmission tower. And it's just northeast of the airport and just south of that Wachusett Reservoir. Maybe somebody can highlight that. Thank you. So yes, basically that's a significant obstacle. The other ones just aren't that interesting. You know, if you're the pilot of an airplane, you're probably not going to get lower than about 1,000 feet above the ground until you're really, you know, turning from downwind to base at the airport there at Worcester. So anyway, that's why I didn't think it was necessary to say exactly which tower, because something that's 1,350 feet high, you know, could actually be a hazard in a regular flight. Okay. Oh yeah, actually, can we go back to the previous slide for a moment? Yeah, actually, let me talk about why that altitude of 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a horizontal radius of 2,000 feet. I don't think that's accurate for most of Cape Cod. That's up over a congested area. So most of Cape Cod would probably not qualify as a congested area, and therefore you would just have to remain 500 feet from buildings or people or vessels. So
The
you could
yellow,
fly,
yeah, the
you could fly
yellow
along the
areas,
beach.
the yellow areas indicate where they have said it's congested. So like right near Hyannis, it's showing congested.
Is that true? I thought that was for nighttime use, and that shows you where you should expect to see a pattern of lights, like city lights. Although, you know, that's pretty much it should line up pretty much one-to-one with what's congested. All right, next.
Alignment.
Next. Oh, back to you.
So you learned about a whole bunch of different airspace categories. So like, for example, around big, busy airports, it's Class Bravo airspace. And this kind of shows the different airspaces. The Class Bravo kind of looks like the quote unquote upside down wedding cake is the way that it's described. And you can see Class A airspace is up at the top, so that's only at high altitude. So you probably won't fly in that as a single engine aircraft. I would just add that the FAA really likes to ask questions about, you know, the visibility requirements in different classes of airspace. So it's definitely something that's worth memorizing.
Okay, so here, this is a chart that's rich. Somebody asked in the chat room, what was the answer for the Cape? It was 700 feet, because that's what it says on the chart for flying around in that general area. They try to make your life easy. And remember, think about it, in the old days, you didn't have a fancy GPS, you didn't have a terrain warning system in your aircraft. You know, you had maybe a knee board and a paper chart in your Piper Cub. Actually, there's a couple brothers, they were teenagers. There's a great book by a guy named, I think Rinker Buck was the brother, but anyway, the author's last name is Buck. And he and his brother flew from, I think, New Jersey to California in a Piper Cub back in the 60s. Maybe it's flight, anyway, I forget the title, but it's a great book. Anyway, so the chart's really designed for that, to help you fly your airplane or helicopter when you don't have any electronic assistance, and to make your life as easy as possible. They're really well designed for that. So yeah, for a safe altitude, they make that pretty much something you can see at a glance, not have to go look at each individual tower. All right, so Lanai doesn't have a control tower. People were divided on that point. The fact, I guess there's a chart legend that would tell you that due to its color, this is not a towered airport. It has a ring of airspace around it down to the surface, which is not Class Delta airspace associated with the control tower, but rather, in fact, another way you can tell it's not a towered airport is that 122.9 at the bottom of the data block. It just says C for around it. So that's the Common Traffic Advisory frequency. The reason that there's Class Echo airspace down to the surface around that airport is to protect airplanes doing instrument approaches. It's impossible for air traffic control to give you a clearance in Class Gulf airspace. If it's uncontrolled airspace, they can't guarantee to you that some other airplane won't be flying around in the clouds. So actually, this, you say, well, when is that real? It could be real in the places like Alaska, where there's very little controlled airspace and not much radar coverage. And you could actually fly on instruments without being without having an instrument clearance from air traffic control. And it can also happen near airports. If Class Golf airspace goes up to 1,200 feet above the surface, and you're on an IFR approach, which comes down to 200 feet above the surface, there's a significant period of time when air traffic control, at that point, they can't guarantee that you won't get very close to some other airplane that's not talking to them, that's not cooperating with the system. So to protect busier airports with instrument approaches, they'll generally say, look, let's put some Class Echo airspace all the way down to the surface so we can control it, and people can't fly around VFR without talking to us unless they meet the Class E airspace weather minimums. The runway numbers, a lot of people figured this out. There is a VOR pretty much right next to the airport. So we can see that airport is lined up with the 030 radio off the VOR. Maybe somebody can highlight that 030 radio. Yeah, right there. So anyway, I'm just guessing that the runway numbers there would be 03 and then add 180 to get to 21. And I think if you look at AirNav, that's actually confirmed. The data block is kind of interesting. You see it's Lanai, LNY. PHNY is actually how you might see it, I think, in a GPS database. That's a little bit confusing. You always see the Ks in front of airports in the US when you're typing them into your Garmin, but on the chart, they omit the K. But in Hawaii, that's a Pacific airport, so it doesn't have the K that the ICAO gives to US airports as a prefix for airports that meet their standards. If an airport is, something like 6B6, like Minuteman right next to Hanscom Field, that's an airport that doesn't have a K in front of it in a GPS database, and it does not meet ICAO standards. That AWAS frequency, 118.375, that's automated weather. 1308 below, that's going to be the field elevation for the airport, something like the center or the average of the airport. There's a 5,000-foot runway, which is lighted part of the time. That star means it's not, that asterisk means it's not full-time lighted. So since there's no control tower, presumably you'll have to turn the lights on by clicking the microphone 5 times. All right, so what about frequency to talk to flight service? We got quite a few answers on that. I think there's always a default of 22 point, is it 22.2 that's the default these days? Or 22.6, who remembers? 22.2. Yeah, but I think they're also saying that, look, you can talk to flight service with Honolulu radio by transmitting on 122.5. That R means they're receiving on that frequency. And then they'll call you back on the VOR frequency of 117.7. It's a little bit cumbersome. You have to tune your audio. You have to push a button on your audio panel to hear the nav. That channel 124, you can ignore that as a civilian pilot. I think maybe there's some military equipment that has these numbered channels, but we never see that. So it's always just 117.7. So there's a lot to learn actually just from this one chart. Somebody asked if the airfield doesn't meet ICAO standards, does it have any practical implications? Yes, usually there's some obstacles around it, or maybe sometimes it could be as simple as the taxiway is very close to the runway, or the fuel farm. Maybe you're doing the approach right on top of the fuel farm. Can we go back, Tina? There was one more airspace slide. Yeah, this is just to show you some local airports to reinforce that instrument approach idea. I think from here you can see, for example, that the most common instrument approaches into Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard are probably going to be to, I think it's runway 24 in both of those cases, because they're protecting down to the surface, pretty far offshore with those magenta. Yeah, can you highlight the magenta rectangle, Tina, up to the right? Yeah. So basically that's telling you that somebody's going to come in from that area on an instrument approach. Okay.
So hopefully you guys understand latitude, longitude. You want to just put your answer in the chat. Good. That's what I like to hear. So the lectures you watched also covered airport diagrams. So this is zooming in a little bit more. You see kind of two intersecting runways. You can land in both directions on each one. You see kind of the taxi area and the hangars.
Okay, so this was one that most people, I think, did get right. The longest runway there is 5,300 feet approximately, and it's part-time lighted. So once again, you probably have to click the microphone. It's not always the CTAF frequency of 122.8 where you're talking to other aircraft and announcing your arrival and so forth. But generally speaking, it is the CTAF frequency. And that's in the chart supplement, formerly called the AFD, where they'll explain to you what you have to click to, what frequency you have to transmit on to get the lights on. Why is it RP19 is, a lot of people surmise that was right traffic, a right pattern for runway 19, which means coming in from the north and landing to the south. Can anybody shed some light? Why is it right traffic for runway 19? We have an obstacle question.
Because do you have a runway, it looks like that's pointing left?
It's not for the other runway. That's a good question. Mountain on the other side. Yeah, I think if you look right underneath the 787, you can see a nasty little hill there. See that 787? There's some kind of hill. So they're basically saying if you're coming down from the north to the south, it's better to make right turns and be on the railroad track side. Actually, no, it's not a railroad track. That's the power line side. Better to be over the power lines and not over that that hill. So that's the right pattern instead of the usual conventional left traffic pattern at an uncontrolled airport. Okay, Tina, take it away.
So we also covered right-of-way rules. Now this was a question I got on my FAA exam. So who has the right-of-way? A blimp, a glider, or an aircraft refueling another aircraft? What do you guys think? So we got some glider, we got some blimp suggestions. So it's glider, but I will say that if you're in a glider and you see a blimp, it's probably not moving that fast. You might as well get out of the way. So basically, the idea is that glider has the right of way over all powered aircraft, and a blimp is technically an airship, which is a powered aircraft. So it has priority over all other powered aircraft. But again, you know, an aircraft refueling another aircraft, they're not going to be that agile. So generally get out of the way, but you're very unlikely to see any of this in the air. So this is a picture of an airplane throwing something out of the plane. Do you know what they're throwing out? Ellen's laughing, I think you know. Pumpkins. That's right. So actually, you are allowed to throw things out of your airplane. The only thing you have to worry about is you can't create a hazard. You can't hurt anybody or damage anything. And so you'll in fact find that there are places where they have big open field and a giant X marks the spot in the middle of it, and you can take bags of flour or pumpkins and fly over and try to hit them. Yeah. I'm thinking that throwing an extra passenger out would be a bit hazardous to that person, but thanks for the suggestion in the chat. Here's another interesting one. You can actually fly near other aircraft, so formation flight. Now this can be very dangerous. I'm not advocating it, but I would like you to know that you can do it. And in fact, we've had you're going to hear about the MIT Flying Club. We had one fly out where some of the pilots, including myself, talked to the other pilots. We agreed on doing somewhat of a formation flight. We were much, much farther away than in this picture, but we were close enough that we landed at Manchester Airport as a flight of 3 airplanes instead of getting individual clearance, which was pretty fun. So as long as everybody agrees and you don't have any collision hazards, then you're allowed to do that. It's important to just talk about the glide slope indicators. You'll see these at different airports. One of the most common is the VASI. So if you see all red, that means you're too low. All white means you're too high. So you want too red, too white. And I would really suggest next time you're even in a commercial flight, when you're getting near an airport, take a look out the window. You'll be able to see either a VASI or a poppy, and you can kind of take a look as to whether it's white or red. A VOR is an important tool that you should be familiar with. So it's an acronym within an acronym, a VHF omnidirectional range. So basically it's a way to do navigation. It sends a VHF signal. The signals are based on line of sight. So if there's a mountain between you and the VOR, you won't actually necessarily receive that signal. And yeah, we had some questions about that, so let's see how you did.
Yes, so, okay, first of all, the frequency here to receive the key New Hampshire VOR is just 109.4 at 126. 122.6 on top is the frequency to communicate with Bangor radio. We did have 100. Oh, yeah, we had, out of 122 responses, we seem to have had at least 20 different answers. Some of them might be the same answer typed differently. But anyway, here, Bangor radio, you can see just below the VOR block, it says the name of the flight service station with which you're communicating. A lot of this is now centralized in this government contractor called Leidos, I think. But 122.6 on top tells you that in addition to that standard 22.2 frequency, you can try them on 22.6, and that might be the best frequency in that area.
So just another example of kind of the difference between the steam gauge and the glass cockpit, because people asked about that. So one advantage with the glass cockpit is if you put in the frequency, it'll actually show, you know, it'll identify that location. So obviously if you put in the wrong frequency, it won't identify the right one. That's an additional helpful hint to make sure you get it right. But what you're supposed to do is put it in and then listen for this Morse code. So you are supposed to identify, even on the steam gauge, that you got the right one.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the steam gauge aircraft, actually, if you upgrade them with a modern GPS unit like a Garmin 750 or 650 or something, then the Garmin box will listen to the Morse code for you and show it. What's next? Oh yeah, this was an interesting one. So this is one that the FAA likes to ask about. So definitely use a simulator or really study this a little bit. So if you're in,
sorry, Philip. Look, we confused folks. So sorry, just to clarify, the Bangor flight service answer is 122.6, and sorry for the confusion. The VOR is 109.4.
Yeah, I think the only reason they're even listed there is because if the FAA has a VOR facility, that also gives them a convenient place to put some kind of transmitter receiver for flight service as well. So I think it's just telling you that, you know, where that VOR is located, there's also some remote communications outlet for the flight service station.
As a general request, if there is a lot of confusion on one of these answers, could you please, for future slides, explicitly mark which one is correct? That would be super helpful.
Okay. All right, so we're over the town of Shawborough. I think this one meets your standards. The right answer is marked on the next slide. So we're over Shawborough, and it's a little bit hard to read. But what radial from? Let's see what people have to say. What radial from the VOR are we on? Which radial of the VOR are we on? People say 03. think it's, yeah, 030 is probably how it would be described. So it's the 030 radial from the VOR. And now let's have a look at these possible answers. They're a little bit hard to read. There's 2, 8, and 9. That was on the King School practice test, presumably copied from a real one. So we have 2, 8, and 9 as possible answers. We're getting 6. That would be interesting. I don't think 6 is right because this shows some deflection, and you should be, pretty much on the 210 radial. Are 2 and 8 the same? I don't think they're the same because there's a, Tina, can you highlight the 2 in the from flag? On 2 and 8. So there's the from flag. So 2 is it's the 210 radial from, and 2 and 8, I guess they could be considered the same. This is the 030 radial 2. So yes, that actually 2 and 8 could be an aircraft at the same position, I think. All right, let's go next. So I like to decide everything by voting, which leads to a scientific consensus and therefore truth. So here the scientific consensus is for 9, that the VOR instrument would read as in the bottom right there, that you're on the 030 radial from the VOR. And note that it doesn't matter. Somebody was saying none are the same, that well, they're not the same indication, but I think it's right to say, Tina may correct me if I'm wrong, or somebody else may correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's correct to say that you could get both 2 and 8 at the same aircraft position, depending on how you turn the OBS knob there. So it's omnibearing selector, I believe. So remember, it doesn't matter which way you're heading. It only matters where the aircraft is. So this instrument will read the same, even if you take your aircraft into a tight 360-degree turn. Throughout the turn, this instrument is not going to move at all. Does that make sense? Can we explain to from? Oh, I wish I could. So yeah, so 2 and 8 are a good example. If you were, well, actually, no, let's stick with 9. So if you were to want to go to the VOR, for example, you would turn your omnibearing selector until the needle centered and you had a 2 indication, and that would tell you what course to fly to get to the VOR. That's one way to think about it, I think. So in this case, we'd have to flip it around, and then we would see that, flying in a calm wind day, flying a heading of approximately 210 would get us to fly straight over the VOR. It's kind of confusing for everybody.
And when you fly over the VOR, then it will flip. And that's one way to indicate that you're over the VOR, is the flipping from to from.
That's true. When you get to the southwest side, you'll be on the 210 radial from the VOR. It's also good for aircraft position. Remember, in the old days, you didn't have a GPS just showing you where you were on a moving map. So you might have to use 2 VORs and a sectional chart and a ruler and a pencil. I guess it would be pretty helpful to have a navigator with you in the aircraft to do that. But basically, at that point, you would tune your VOR receiver and make sure you were getting centered on from radials as you're drawing out from these centers, right? So basically, if you're, 9, it doesn't tell you you're over Shawborough, but it does tell you you're somewhere. Maybe Tina can draw a line with her cursor, at least, from the VOR through Shawborough and beyond. It tells you you're somewhere on that line.
Right. So for the folks that suggested, drawing a dot for the location, remember a VOR doesn't tell you your location. It tells you what radial you're on from or to the VOR. And so you can't draw a dot to figure out where it is. And then another question was, why are some of the lines not centered? Well, it means that you're not flying on that radial. So it means you're either to the left or the right of a given radial. VORs are quite confusing. For time, we're probably going to have to move on, but we will make sure to clarify the answers. And again, in this case, we're saying the answer here.
That's a part of the FAA books that you have to read once or twice. And there are apps, there's all kinds of websites and apps devoted to helping people wrap their heads around this. But as you see,
for practical flying, I will say most people don't use VORs at all anymore. They use GPS.
Yeah, so if you needed to know your precise position over Shawborough, you would need to tune to 2 different VORs in sequence. If you were in a circle, or maybe have 2 VORs in your aircraft and 2 CDIs, and then draw 2 lines on your chart, and where they intersect is where you are. And there are some VORs or some aircraft that have what's called distance measuring equipment, where it uses phase shift to see how far away you are from the VOR, in which case a single VOR can give you a pinpoint position.
Right. Practically, you're going to use a GPS and you're going to know where you are. For time, I want to make sure to give our speakers some time, so I'm going to go a little faster. A transponder is something that most of you will have in your aircraft, and it helps ATC figure out where you are. There are some important transponder codes. Most of the time you'll have 1200, which is just your VFR aircraft. So does anyone know what it is for if you got hijacked? Yes.
7500.
What about lost communications? Yes, good job. And general emergency. Very good. These are very important to know. Don't mess around with the hijacking one. You might find a, jet fly up beside next to you. So please don't mess around with that one. The way that you say numbers is kind of interesting. There's kind of a unique way of doing it. So, we see, like, for example, frequencies, 124.4. So let me just ask a question, see how confused people are about this. So say the answer in the chat. So we get a little bit of confusion. So this is the way that you say that. So again, looking at the way that they do this, above 10,000, you say 10,000. So that's why it's not A. So speaking on the radios is very, something you're going to have to learn pretty early on. And so generally when you dial in, you want to listen before you start talking. And then it's very simple. You state who you are, so who are you talking to is the very first thing. So if you're in this case, you're an airplane that's flying in for landing. So you're in the air already. So you're trying to talk to the airport you're trying to land at. So you is Hanscom Tower. And then me is the aircraft you're flying. So I'm flying, in this case, it's a Skyhawk November 53569er. And then you say where you are. So you could say 5 miles west of the field. If you're still on the ground taxiing, then you might be Hanscom Ground. You didn't change, so you're still Skyhawk November 53569er. Where might be West Ramp or Taxiway Sierra. And then what? So what is it that you're calling about? So this person is saying inbound for landing. And then with, so this is your ATIS information, and that is what you're going to learn about today. Today's all about weather, and so your lectures are going to talk about the ATIS and the weather information, so they have information whiskey. And if you get confused, you don't know what's going on, you can always say unable. You can say again if you don't understand what they're saying, and they'll say it again. And you can also say that you're a student pilot, even if you're not a student pilot, and they'll speak a lot slower to you. So lost communications procedures, just wanted to highlight this one. Most of the time you didn't actually lose communications. So first, just double check. So you might have accidentally bumped your knee against the headphone jack and unplugged yourself, or you turned the volume down. So don't keep making radio calls repeatedly, because it's possible that your transmitter is still working. So you might be clogging up the airways, transmitting repeatedly, and in fact you can't hear. And so what you should do is obviously stay calm. In all emergency situations, you got to aviate, then navigate, then communicate. So first focus on flying the airplane, then focus on making sure you know where you're going, you're not going to hit anything, and then focus on communicate. So this is really about the communicate. So to communicate to others that there was an issue, that what you guys all got correct in the chat is you squawk your transponder to 7600, so you let people know you lost communications. And then these are some suggestions. Now you can also go to an untowered airport, like we talked about. Sometimes you don't even need to speak with anyone. It's not actually a requirement. So if you go to an untowered airport, you could go there. You might want to continue to transmit your location in case your transmitter is still working, so people know that you're coming in and you can land. These are some air gun signals. If you lost communications and you're landing at a towered airport, if you don't see the light gun signals when you're on short final, you should be prepared to go around.
Yeah, somebody asked a question about whether you can ask the tower for practice with the light gun, and the answer is yes, you can. They're very happy to bring it out for a training exercise.
Okay, so here's a practice question. Take a look at it and let me know A, B, or C. Yes, that's right. So I wanted to point out on our Discord chat, there are several of us chatting there, and there are ways to practice ATC. So folks that are nervous about speaking on the radio, there are simulated and real ATC folks you can talk to and practice. Here are a couple of the different ones that have been talked about in the Discord. Feel free to join the conversation. All right, for time, I'm going to go ahead and let our speakers start off. Let's start with the MIT Flying Club.
I'm muted. All right. Hello, I'm Chris Renard. I'm from the MIT Flying Club, and happy to meet all of you. Happy to see a lot of people in this. So who are we? What is the MIT Flying Club? What do we do? So first of all, we're a group of MIT students and other affiliated people from around the area that like flying. That's the core of who we are. We have a couple of things that we do. So first is we have the Flying Pilots mailing list, and here you'll see questions about flying. Sometimes there are instrument pilots or commercial pilots who need to maintain their instrument currency or go out for a flight, or just anybody else who wants to go out for a flight, and they'll say, hey, who wants to come? And that's a really good way. Thank you. That's a really good way to pick up rides, and free rides often. Another thing that we do when we're in person is we do flyouts. Tina mentioned this, where we get a bunch of pilots, a bunch of people from the flying club, and we kind of divvy up the pilots, divvy up the airplanes. We go somewhere cool, and we show people who aren't pilots, or if you are a pilot, we show you guys, and you come along, and it's a great day. We have food, and it's a social activity. Another thing that we do are hangar talks. So this year they're going to be virtual. There's an upcoming announcement on what those are and what they're going to be. And we do hangar talks, which are basically somebody who's really cool and involved in aviation and knows their stuff comes and gives a talk about something that they are passionate about. I've been to a couple. It's a very cool experience. Lastly, we have a website which is useful for, which I think at least is useful for those of you who are pilots and want to know more about something. There's some currency articles on there. There's also, hey, I'm an international student. How do I get my pilot's license? Or I'm in this situation. What can I do? And there's some guides, helpful stuff that you can find around there. Another thing that we're doing, and this is a recent addition, is a scholarship fund. For 2 students, we're going to give them $500 scholarships that will go towards the purchase of Tech Flight 150 hours, not the actual airplane. But yeah, 2 $500 scholarships that go towards the purchase of hours on the Tech Flight 150 that you can put and log towards your training. For this, applications will open in early March, and an email will be sent out to flying general and flying pilots. A couple of notes: you have to have a training plan to be eligible, you have to be a member of the flying club, and MIT undergrads will have priority, and MIT grad students after that. Related note, we have a capital campaign. We've got a capital campaign. There's a email going out about that soon, but if you just can't wait, there's a link right here. And Tina, can you push the slides out to all these people? All right.
Yes.
There's a link right here where you can donate to MIT Flying Club, and all of these donations are tax deductible, if that's your thing. Great. So we've got a mailing list, a Discord, and a membership survey. So Discord is like the IAP class Discord, except designed to be more year-round and slightly more people. Mailing list, you can specify whether you want to be on Flying General, which is for big, wide, full club announcements, or Flying Pilots, which is, hey, I want to go out for a flight. Anyone want to come and join me? And then there's a membership survey last, which will help us get in touch with you. Thanks. I guess I can take 1 or 2 questions. Okay, yeah, I can share the link in the Discord thread. All right. If anybody has any questions, now's the time. Great. If you want to join, you have to sign up for the mailing list and attend one event.
Thanks very much, Chris. And as we're switching over to Ted's screen, I'll just add that as Meenakshi shared on the first day as our poster child student who took the ground school class and became a pilot, some of the flyouts that she talked about and that I talked about, like flying to the Maine to Bar Harbor, those were MIT flyouts with the MIT flying. Any questions for Chris before we switch over to Ted?
And I think that should be the link.
Are you guys flying now?
Not with COVID, unfortunately.
No.
It's kind of the thing that we want as many people on an MIT campus so that we can go and, bring them to the airport and go flying.
Okay, feel free to add more questions to Chris in the chat. Ted, would you like to take control?
Sure, I'll share something here. So I don't know if you can see me as well, hopefully. I'm Ted Ackworth. I was at MIT until 2007. I came as a postdoc in 2002 and as a Sloan Fellow, kind of a little bit later in career. And when I came to Boston, came to MIT, I wanted to continue flying. I already had my pilot's license, and I found the flying club and said, great, where's the plane? And the MIT Flying Club didn't have a plane. And they were sort of using East Coast Aero Club or some other commercial rental sort resources around the Boston area. But I was sort of disappointed that here's MIT, what a great institution, yet we don't have our own plane. And I got my pilot's license in a Cessna 150 that my father and I bought. It had been like 15 years before, and gotten my license in it. And so my father and I decided to donate our plane to the MIT Flying Club to make it available at very low cost for students. The plane, was a little bit older. My father's older, so it hadn't been used as much. It had a very young engine in it, although it hadn't been used much. And with the help of some folks at the MIT Flying Club and at the Beverly Airport, we brought the plane up to Beverly. We actually trailered it because it was just out of annual, and we were nervous about flying. Well, we couldn't fly because it was out of annual, And we had a number of volunteers from the MIT flying community, also some other local schools and other interested folks. And we put the wings back on and put it all back together and annualed it, and have had it available for affordable rental in Beverly since then. Today we have about, I think, 19 students, folks signed up to use it. Our goal, and we formed a nonprofit company, a 501c3 nonprofit called the Tech Flight Corp. And so we're a charitable educational entity. We have a board of directors, which includes always the president of the MIT Flying Club. So every year when the MIT Flying Club gets a new president, that person is automatically has a seat at the board of directors table. We've been putting together all kinds of information here, more than you probably care to read all in one go. But this is sort of a how-to about the plane if you're interested in using it. And then once you are using it, sort of some of the guidelines and things like how to fuel it or whatnot. I'll send out some links after my slot here to some of these resources, the how-to guide, and happy to answer any questions. The plane is active right now. It's year-round. We get more busy in the summer, the warmer months, but we run it year-round. This coming summer will be, I think, our third or fourth summer doing it, and we're pretty steady state now. And the plane's getting a lot of use. And at this very moment, it's down. We're doing the cylinders. We're doing some maintenance on the cylinders, and we're about to do the annual maintenance. You guys will learn that any aircraft has to have what's called an annual. It's a really comprehensive, federally mandated, inspection and maintenance of every aircraft. So we'll be doing that and having the plane in good shape and ready to go for the spring. I think with that, I'll answer any questions. Ooh,
Ed, you have a question in the chat.
Okay, let me jump over to the chat. I don't know if I should stop the share at the same time. Let's see here. Maybe you could feed me one while I try to find that screen.
Sure, no worries. It's from Alex, says, how did you get FAA approval to fix your own plane? Can anyone fix their own plane and have the annual done to verify their work?
The answer is no. You can't maintain your own certificated aircraft. You have to have a FAA licensed aircraft mechanic do it. There are a few small things you can do on your plane. Very minimal, and sometimes you can find a mechanic who's willing to let you help them do some of the work, or at least get the plane ready. But generally, it's meant for good reason, for safety reasons, to keep your plane kind of out of your hands and have a pro maintain the plane. So we had a licensed mechanic supervise that work you saw in the video, and those things were just like getting the wings out of the packaging and getting them ready, but the mechanic was there to, make sure to torque the bolts properly. I don't know why I'm having trouble here finding the chat.
And I'll just add to that answer that tomorrow, day 4, there's a lecture for you to watch on aircraft ownership and maintenance, which will get into the specific details to elaborate on Ted's answer.
How heavy is that aircraft?
Like in terms of what's its weight overall?
Yep. Yeah, I'm a sport pilot, yeah.
Yeah, it is a Cessna 150, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the order of about 2,000 pounds. Okay. And it can carry 2 people and fuel, but you'd be stretched to do 2 people and full fuel. Yep. Most Cessnas, like the 150, the 172, 172 is a 4-seater, but typically you can't put like 4 full-size adults and full fuel.
Yeah.
So the 150 is the classic trainer. It is the plane that the most people learn to fly on or have over the years. It's been the most produced trainer on Earth. It's the most docile, the safest, the lowest cost of ownership, aircraft. So it's a great choice if you want to start flying. It's a great choice of aircraft.
The owner of East Coast Aero Club has some Piper Tomahawks, which are pretty similar to the 150 in capability. And he says that when he started the flight school 30 years ago, 85% of students and instructors were light enough to train in the Tomahawk. And today, that percentage is 15%. So he went from 85% of people light enough to go in a two-seater to now 85% of customers and instructors have to fly in a four-seater for their two-seat training mission.
Yeah, Van's Aircraft introduced a wider aircraft. Their newest one has big seats for your bigger average American. Yeah, the 150 is tight. If you want to use the plane, you also need an instructor, of course, if you're a student. There are some instructors around the MIT community. You're welcome to try to, cajole them into teaching you. There are also some instructors at Beverly Airport. Mike Reeker is doing a lot of instruction. He's the instructor for the North Shore Aero Club, and he's pretty light, so that's helpful if you're bigger. It's a squeeze. But the price is right. It's $85 an hour wet tack, we call it. Those are some terms you'll learn. When you're flying a plane, there's Hobbs time and there's tack time. The tack time is the rotations of the engine. So when you're idling the engine, like when you're taxiing, you're consuming less engine time. So whenever you're renting a plane, you prefer to do it tack time. It's usually about like 80% of Hobbs time. So it's cheaper. And then the second thing is, does the plane come with fuel or not? If you rent a plane, fuel is probably the largest single component of a rental cost. So it's, of course, very important to know if you have to put in the fuel yourself, or if the plane comes with fuel, or if they're going to charge you some price for fuel. Usually when they charge you some price for fuel, that's the most expensive for you. If it's included, that's the cheapest for you. And fueling yourself is somewhere in the middle.
I want to add some of the questions that were in the chat group I answered at the bottom of the course collaboration document. So people can go there if they want to see answers. Just for time reasons, I answered them by typing.
I see a couple more questions that I'd love to answer. We actually are considering getting another plane. The usage has been high, not terribly high. We want to be, if we have too many people have access to plane, then it'll be hard for you to get slots. There's a web-based scheduler, like a calendar, and you can go once you signed up to use the plane, you can go grab a slot. But if we get too many people using it, those Saturdays and Sundays will become really hard for you to get a slot, and you'll have to start planning even earlier. So we're already looking.
Let me just jump in for 1 second, just because we're at time, and I'll let you continue to answer afterwards. So for today, again, today's all about weather, also seaplanes and the drones. So please take a look at these 4 lectures today, and we have posted the day 3 link. It's also on our class website that we've posted. I'll put that in the chat also, and I'll let Ted continue, and feel free to keep going on these questions.
I'm happy to stick around. I know we're up against time, but if anybody wants to keep asking, I'll stick on for another 5 or 10 minutes. And I'm looking now at the comments, so I'll work some of those. Somebody asked, isn't it a 152, a Cessna 152? There was a 152 that came starting in 1977. They put a slightly bigger engine in the 150. Ours is the very last year that the 150 was produced in 1976. But the airframes are, I believe, identical. There's a question, how much do you need to weigh to be in the 150? There's no minimum weight. Actually, the lighter you are, the better the airplane performs. But you have to look at the useful load that the aircraft can take to know overall weight that you can put in the plane. And that's something that you'll learn in one of your modules, is how to do weight and balance on the plane. It's critical for every airplane. You have to add up the weight of the people, the luggage, the air, the fuel, the oil, and make sure that altogether you don't exceed the weight of the plane that it can carry, but also the center of gravity in the aircraft. If you put a whole lot of weight way back towards the rear, you can upset the stability. Very critical. Let's see. Yes, anyone in the flying club can use the plane. And it's not restricted to MIT Flying Club at all. It's not even restricted to MIT affiliates, which could include students, faculty, staff, alumni, any school, you know, the engineering schools, the business school. It's not, you know, that's the MIT community, and we're sort of focusing on that community, but we have some students from other institutions or not. We like them to know somebody at MIT just so we can have a bit of a reference, but it's not restricted to only MIT or even only MIT Flying Club. We're just the resource to put it together.
The best weight and balance story is your U.S. government. They loaded up a $5 or $6 million brand new Pilatus PC-12 with a bunch of drugs that they'd confiscated from somebody. They put them all in the rear baggage area and smashed the airplane down on its tail while it was still sitting on the ramp.
Well, it's good they did it then and not during takeoff.
I want to pick up on this question from the chat because I have this question as well.